I thought my life was already falling apart. I just didn't know a single scratch on a luxury car would be the thing that changed everything. My name is Emmett Rowan, and 3 months ago, I was the person everyone overlooked at work. I stayed late, fixed other people's mistakes, and quietly watched opportunities pass me by because I couldn't afford to fail. I was one missed paycheck away from losing my apartment, and this new marketing project was the only chance I had to prove I belonged. Then, on the worst night of my year, I made one tiny mistake that looked impossible to survive. I backed out of a parking space, heard the sickening sound of metal against metal, and froze. The car beside me wasn't just expensive. It was the kind of car that probably cost more than everything I owned. My heart dropped as I stared at the thin line across the flawless black paint. For a moment, all I could think about was the meeting I had the next morning, the career I was trying to build, and how quickly everything could disappear. I could have walked away. Nobody had seen me. Nobody would have known. But that wasn't who I was. I left my phone number under the windshield and waited. 10 minutes later, a man stepped out of the elevator across the garage. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the car, then at me. I expected anger. I expected judgment. Instead, he asked, "Are you the person who left the note?" I nodded, barely able to speak. "I'm sorry. I know I can't fix this immediately, but I'll find a way. I'll pay what I can. I just need time." The man studied me quietly, and somehow that silence felt heavier than shouting. He looked like someone who had never needed to ask anyone for anything. His suit was perfectly tailored, his expression unreadable, and his presence alone made the entire parking garage feel smaller. "You stayed," he finally said. I frowned. What? Most people would have left. I looked away. That wouldn't have been right. Something changed in his expression, just for a second. Like my answer surprised him. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a business card, and handed it to me. "We'll discuss it tomorrow." I looked down at the card but didn't recognize the name. I only noticed the simple black lettering and the confidence behind it. Soren Whitaker. I spent the entire night barely sleeping. My mind kept replaying every possible disaster. Maybe he was going to sue me. Maybe I would lose my job. Maybe tomorrow would be the day everything collapsed. Then morning arrived, and I walked into the conference room for the most important presentation of my career. My hands were shaking as I arranged my notes. This was my chance to finally be seen. The room filled with executives. People who had spent years building careers I was still chasing. Then the door opened. Everyone stood. I looked up. The man who walked in was the same person who had stood beside that damaged luxury car the night before. But this time, nobody saw him as a stranger in a parking garage. They saw him as the CEO of Whitaker Holdings. Soren Whitaker walked to the head of the table, placed a folder down, and looked directly at me. The room went silent. I was sure my secret was about to destroy me. I was sure everyone would see me as a mistake. But Soren only said, "I believe we should hear Emmett's presentation first." My breath caught. That was the first time anyone with real power had chosen to listen to me instead of dismissing me. I didn't understand why he protected my chance. I didn't understand why the man who owned that car wasn't asking for payment. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe my life wasn't ending. Maybe it was finally beginning. Then Soren looked at me again and said the words I never expected to hear. "Emmett, show them what you created." And suddenly, the man I feared losing everything to became the one person who might change everything. For the first time in years, I had someone powerful sitting in front of me who was not trying to decide whether I was worth noticing. Soren Whitaker had every reason to ignore me. I was just an employee presenting an idea in a room full of executives who had more experience, more confidence, and more influence than I did. But instead of looking past me, he listened. And somehow that was more terrifying than being rejected. After the meeting ended, I expected him to forget about me. People like Soren always had another 100 things waiting for them. They did not remember the person who accidentally damaged their car in a parking garage. They did not remember the junior employee who nervously held a presentation folder with shaking hands. But Soren remembered everything. The moment I stepped out of the conference room, I found him standing near the hallway window overlooking the city. The view behind him made it obvious why everyone treated him differently. The entire building moved because of decisions he made. Employees lowered their voices when he walked by. Executives waited for his approval before speaking. Soren Whitaker was not just wealthy. He was someone people built their careers around. "You did well in there," he said. I stopped. I was not expecting praise from him. "Thank you." I was just trying not to ruin the opportunity. His expression changed slightly. Why do you think you would ruin it? I almost laughed because the answer felt obvious. Because people like me usually do not get a second chance. For a moment, Soren said nothing. Then he looked toward the busy office around us. People like you are exactly the reason companies need new ideas. I did not know what to say. I had spent so much time trying to prove I belonged that I forgot what it felt like for someone to simply believe I did. Before I could respond, a team member approached with a problem from another department. The conversation quickly became tense. Everyone started suggesting expensive solutions, but nobody addressed the actual issue. I quietly mentioned a small detail from the customer data that everyone had overlooked. The room became silent. Soren turned toward me. Explain. I did. I expected someone to interrupt. Nobody did. When I finished, Soren looked at the team and said, "That is the direction we are taking." The decision happened instantly. No debate. No hesitation. My idea had just been accepted by the CEO himself. Later that afternoon, I received a message from my manager. Soren wanted me assigned directly to the project team. At first, I thought there had been a mistake. People did not usually move. Someone like me closer to the CEO. There had to be another reason. When I asked Soren about it, he simply said, "You notice things other people miss. I want that perspective on this project." I looked at him carefully. "Is this because of the car?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "No," the answer came immediately. "The car was an accident. Your work is not." That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. Because for the first time, someone separated my mistake from who I was. That evening, I found Soren still working alone in his office. The lights were low, the city glowing behind the glass walls. He looked completely different without the crowd around him. Less like a CEO, more like a person who had simply been carrying too much for too long. "Do you ever leave this place?" I asked before I could stop myself. He looked surprised. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It was small, almost impossible to notice, but it changed his entire face. "Not often." That sounds exhausting. He looked at me like nobody had ever said that to him before. Not nobody who wanted something from him. Not somebody trying to impress him. Just someone who noticed. "You are different from most people here," he said. I looked away. I do not think that is a compliment. It is. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The distance between us was still there. He was still the CEO. I was still the employee who had nearly panicked over a scratch on a car. But something had changed. I no longer saw him as someone untouchable, and he no longer looked at me like someone insignificant. The next morning, I arrived at work expecting everything to return to normal. Instead, my manager handed me a new assignment. "You will be working directly with Mr. Whitaker for the next month." I stared at the paper. "Directly?" He nodded. "The CEO requested it himself." My stomach tightened. Working beside Soren Whitaker was an opportunity one could not refuse. But it also meant one thing. The man who could change my entire career was now the person I would see every day. And I had no idea whether that would save me or make everything much more complicated. Working directly with Soren Whitaker sounded like the kind of opportunity people spent years chasing. For me, it felt more like walking into a room where I was not sure I belonged. Every morning, I entered the executive floor and felt the difference. People moved quickly, spoke carefully, and treated every word from Soren like it carried weight. I was still Emmett Rowan, the employee who had once stood beside a damaged luxury car wondering if his entire future was about to disappear. But now, somehow, I was sitting across from the most powerful person in the company, helping shape one of its biggest projects. At first, I thought Soren only saw me as useful. I thought I was just another piece on his business board. But over the next few weeks, something changed. Soren started noticing things no one else did. Not the mistakes. Not the nervous moments. The things I actually brought to the table. During our first project meeting together, several executives presented polished reports filled with impressive numbers and complicated strategies. Everyone agreed quickly because nobody wanted to challenge the CEO. Then Soren turned to me. "Emmett, what do you think?" I hesitated. Everyone looked at me. I knew that giving the wrong answer could make me look inexperienced. But I also knew the data did not tell the full story. "I think we are missing the reason customers are leaving," I said. The room became quiet. One executive leaned back with a doubtful expression. "And what makes you think you know that better than the research team?" Before I could respond, Soren spoke. "Because he actually studied the customer behavior instead of only reading the summary." The executive stopped talking. Soren had defended me before I even needed to defend myself. After the meeting, I expected him to criticize me for taking a risk. Instead, he asked, "Why were you afraid to say that?" I looked at him. Because people usually do not like being challenged by someone they consider less important. Soren was silent for a moment. Then he said, "That is their mistake, not yours." Those words stayed with me. Soren was different when nobody else was watching. In public, he was the CEO everyone feared. Behind closed doors, he was someone who noticed when I skipped lunch because I was too busy working. He was someone who quietly left a coffee on my desk during a late-night review because he remembered how I took it. Small things, almost invisible things. But coming from someone like him, they meant more than grand gestures. The strangest part was how differently he treated me compared to everyone else. When executives interrupted each other, he allowed the discussion to continue. When I spoke, he listened until I finished. One evening, we attended a company networking event where investors and partners gathered. I expected to stay in the background. That was what people like me usually did. I stood near the side of the room, holding a glass of water and watching important people exchange introductions. Then someone approached Soren and asked, "Who is your assistant?" Before I could correct them, Soren looked at me. "He is not my assistant." His voice was calm but firm. "He is the strategist responsible for the campaign that everyone here is discussing tonight." The person immediately changed their attitude. I felt something unfamiliar. Not embarrassment. Not fear. Recognition. Soren had not rescued me. He had simply made sure people saw what was already there. Later that night, while we were leaving, I noticed something I had never seen before. A small silver ring on Soren's hand, engraved with a symbol I did not recognize. It looked old, almost like it carried family history. When I glanced at it, Soren noticed. For a second, his expression changed. The confident CEO disappeared, replaced by someone more guarded. Then he closed his hand, and the moment passed. "Long day?" I asked. He looked surprised by the question. Most people asked him about business. Nobody asked how he was. "Yes," he admitted quietly. That simple answer felt like a door opening just a little. For the first time, I realized Soren was not just a man with money, power, and control. He was someone carrying a life I knew nothing about. And somehow, he was allowing me to see small pieces of it. The next morning, everything changed again. I arrived at my desk and found a message from Soren waiting for me. It was not about the project. It was not about a deadline. It was an invitation to a private strategy meeting that only senior executives usually attended. I stared at the screen for a long time. Soren Whitaker was not just giving me a chance anymore. He was bringing me closer to his world. And I was beginning to wonder if that was the most dangerous opportunity of all. By the time the company announced the final stage of the campaign, I thought I had finally proven myself. I had stopped seeing myself as the person who accidentally damaged a luxury car and nearly lost everything. I was Emmett Rowan, the strategist whose ideas were changing the direction of a major project. But I quickly learned that earning respect was not the same as keeping it. The moment people started noticing me, they also started asking questions. And some of those questions were not about my work. They were about why Soren Whitaker trusted me. The rumors started quietly. Someone said I was moving too quickly for someone at my position. Someone else suggested that I only had access to important meetings because the CEO personally liked me. I tried to ignore it. I told myself results mattered more than opinions. But then the comments reached a room where they could actually hurt me. During a review meeting with senior partners, one executive looked at my presentation and said, "The strategy is impressive, but I wonder if we are giving too much influence to someone without enough experience." The words were polite. The meaning was not. I felt every person in the room waiting to see how I would respond. A few weeks earlier, I would have stayed quiet. I would have apologized just to make the tension disappear. But something had changed. I looked at the data in front of me and calmly explained every decision behind the strategy. I answered every question. I showed every reason why the plan worked. When I finished, the room was silent. Then Soren spoke. The problem is not his experience. Everyone turned toward him. His expression was calm, but his voice carried the same authority that made entire companies listen. The problem is that you are judging his position instead of evaluating his results. Nobody interrupted. Nobody challenged him. Soren continued. Emmett earned his place in this room. It was not a dramatic speech. It was not an emotional display. It was simply a fact from a man whose opinion could change careers. After the meeting, I expected him to leave immediately. Instead, he waited until everyone else was gone. "Are you okay?" he asked. I looked at him, surprised. "You are asking me that after defending me in front of everyone?" "Yes." I laughed softly. "Most people would assume I should be grateful." Soren looked at me seriously. "You should not have needed protection from something you already proved was not true." That answer stayed with me. Because Soren was not protecting me because he thought I was weak. He was protecting the truth about me. Later that evening, we attended a private company dinner with investors. It was the kind of event where people measured your value before they even learned your name. I expected to stand quietly beside the executives. Instead, Soren introduced me first. "This is Emmett Rowan. He is the reason this campaign succeeded." Several people looked surprised. Not because I had failed, because they had never expected me to matter. Throughout the night, I noticed something strange. Soren was distant with everyone else. Short answers, professional conversations, no unnecessary warmth. But whenever he spoke to me, his entire attitude changed. He asked if I had eaten. He noticed when I looked tired. He remembered small details I had mentioned days earlier. It was subtle, but impossible to ignore. At one point, a partner joked, "Careful, Mr. Whitaker. People might think you have a favorite employee." The room laughed. I felt embarrassed and immediately looked away. But Soren did not. He simply replied, "I have a favorite person to trust when the work matters." The comment was simple, but it left everyone quiet. On the drive back, I could not stop thinking about it. "You did not have to say that," I told him. Soren looked out the window. I know. That answer surprised me more than anything else. Because he was admitting that he chose to say it. Not because he had to. Not because it benefited the company. Because he wanted to. For the first time, I wondered if I was not the only one affected by this strange connection between us. But the next morning, that feeling disappeared when I received an unexpected message. The board had requested a special review of the campaign. Someone had questioned whether my involvement created a conflict of interest. My heart sank as I read the words. The opportunity one had fought so hard to earn was suddenly being questioned again. And this time, I knew the problem was not just about my work. It was about how close I had become to Soren Whitaker. I thought I finally understood Soren Whitaker. I thought behind the expensive suits, the endless meetings, and the impossible expectations was simply a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. And maybe that was why I trusted him. Not because he was powerful, not because he had changed my career, but because he made me feel like I mattered. Then I discovered the truth that made me question everything. The board review started earlier than expected. I arrived at the conference room with my notes prepared, ready to explain every decision behind the campaign. But before I could sit down, I noticed the atmosphere was different. People were whispering. Nobody looked at me directly. My manager avoided eye contact. Something had changed. When Soren entered, the room became silent. He looked calm, but I noticed the tension in his expression. It was the same look I had seen when he noticed the engraved ring on his hand. The look of someone carrying something he did not want anyone else to know. The review began with questions about the campaign, but then the conversation shifted. One board member placed a document on the table. "There are concerns about your relationship with Mr. Whitaker and whether this project received unfair influence." My stomach tightened. I looked at Soren. He did not look surprised. That hurt more than the accusation itself. He already knew. After the meeting ended, I waited for him in his office. The city lights reflected across the glass walls, but for the first time, the view did not feel impressive. It felt distant. "How long were you going to let me believe this was normal?" I asked. Soren looked at me carefully. "Emmett." "No. I need an answer." My voice was quieter than I expected. "Did you know who I was before I walked into that meeting?" Silence. And that silence gave me the answer. Soren finally said, "Yes." The room felt smaller. "Why?" I asked. "Because of the car?" He shook his head. "No, then what?" Soren walked toward his desk and picked up a folder. Inside were documents about the company restructuring, the board review, and my project. "I knew you were connected to the campaign team before that night. I had seen your work." I stared at him. "Then why did you never tell me?" Soren looked away for a moment. "Because the moment people know who I am, they change." His voice was lower now. "They become careful. They stop being honest. They tell me what they think I want to hear." I remembered the first night in the parking garage. I remembered standing there expecting anger, and instead finding someone who seemed surprised that I stayed. Soren continued. When you thought I was just the owner of a damaged car, you treated me like a person. I wanted to understand. I really did. But the hurt was already there. You tested me. No, his answer came quickly. I was trying to protect something real before I knew if it was real. That sentence should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me realize how different our worlds were. Soren had the power to control information. He could decide what I knew and when I knew it. I could not. Do you understand why this feels different for me? I asked. He did not answer immediately. That was enough. Because I knew he did. Soren Whitaker, the man who could make decisions affecting thousands of people, had been afraid of one thing. That I would stop seeing him the same way. I never wanted to make you feel like you were part of some experiment, he finally said. You were never that. I looked at him. But you still chose not to trust me. The words hit harder than I expected. Soren had no defense against that. Because it was true. For the first time since meeting him, I saw the flaw behind all his control. He was not hiding because he did not care. He was hiding because he cared too. Much about losing something he had never expected to find. But understanding his reason did not erase the feeling of betrayal. I stepped back. I need time. Soren nodded slowly. No argument. No attempt to use his position. Just acceptance. The next day, I requested to be removed from direct work with him until the board review ended. My manager looked surprised, but approved it. I returned to my old desk, the same place where I had started. Except I was not the same person anymore. I had gained confidence. I had gained recognition. But I had also lost the one person I thought I could trust completely. Across the office, behind the glass walls of the executive floor, Soren stood alone watching the city. And for the first time, the man everyone feared had no idea how to fix the one thing he cared about most. After I moved back to my old desk, I told myself I was doing the right thing. I told myself distance would make everything easier. I told myself I needed to remember who I was before Soren Whitaker entered my life. But the truth was, everything felt different now. I was no longer invisible at work. People respected my ideas. They listened when I spoke. I had finally become the person I always wanted to be. Yet every time I walked past the executive floor, I noticed the empty space beside the window where Soren used to stand. And I hated that I noticed. A week passed without us working together. Soren did not try to force a conversation. He did not use his position to bring me back. He respected the boundary I created, and somehow that made the distance harder. Then one evening, a major client issue threatened the entire campaign. The same executives who questioned me before suddenly needed the person who understood the strategy best. My manager asked if I would help. I hesitated. Working with Soren again felt dangerous. But the project mattered. So I agreed. When I arrived at the office late that night, I expected the same cold CEO I had always known. Instead, I found Soren alone in the conference room, surrounded by documents and untouched coffee. He looked exhausted. Not like a powerful executive managing a crisis. Like someone who had been carrying everything by himself for too long. He looked up when I entered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Thank you for coming." No command. No expectation. Just gratitude. We worked for hours. And slowly, I noticed something different. Soren was still brilliant. Still focused. Still able to control a room with a single sentence. But now I saw the cost of it. Every decision passed through him. Every mistake became his responsibility. Every person expected him to have an answer. Around midnight, the power briefly flickered during a storm, and the office became quiet. The city outside disappeared behind heavy rain. Soren stood near the window, looking more tired than I had ever seen him. "Everyone thinks having control means you are never afraid," he said. I looked at him. "Are you?" He smiled slightly, but there was no confidence behind it. More often than people think. It was the first time he admitted something like that. Soren Whitaker, the man who always seemed impossible to shake, was afraid. "My family built this company before I was old enough to understand what it meant," he continued. "I learned early that mistakes were expensive, not just financially. People depended on every decision I made. I listened quietly, not because I forgot what happened, not because everything was suddenly fixed, but because I finally saw the reason behind the wall he built. You should have trusted me enough to tell me," I said. Soren nodded. "I know." He did not defend himself. He did not try to make it smaller. "I thought if you knew everything, you would see me the way everyone else does." I looked at him. "And how do they see you?" He looked away. "As someone useful, someone powerful, someone who cannot afford to need anyone." That answer hurt because I understood it. You were afraid I would leave. Soren was quiet. Then he admitted, yes. That was the moment something changed. Not because the problem disappeared. Not because the past was erased. But because for the first time, Soren was not asking me to trust his position. He was showing me his weakness. Over the next few days, we started rebuilding things slowly. Soren stopped making decisions for me and started asking for my opinion. I stopped assuming every action from him had a hidden reason. When I worked late, he reminded me to eat. When he forgot to take breaks, I reminded him that he was not a machine. It became a strange balance. I helped him remember he was human. He helped me remember I did not have to fight every battle alone. One afternoon, during another meeting, someone questioned whether I was still too inexperienced to lead the project. Before Soren could answer, I spoke for myself. I explained my plan, defended my choices, and earned the room's respect without needing anyone to rescue me. Afterward, Soren smiled. You did not need me. I looked at him. No, but I wanted you there. For the first time since the truth came out, I saw something soften in his expression. The distance between us was not gone. The trust was not fully repaired. But something stronger than before had started growing. Then, just as things began to feel steady again, an email arrived from the board. The final review had been scheduled, and this time, the decision was not only about the campaign. It was about whether Soren Whitaker's judgment could still be trusted, which meant everything we had rebuilt was about to be tested in front of everyone. The board meeting was supposed to be the moment everything changed. After weeks of rebuilding trust, I finally believed Soren and I had found a way forward. Not a perfect one. Not one where everything was magically forgotten, but something real. I believed he understood that trust was not something he could buy with power or protect with influence. It was something we had to build together. Then I walked into the conference room and realized someone had already decided what everyone would believe about me. The atmosphere was different before I even sat down. Executives who once asked for my opinions now avoided looking at me. Conversations stopped when I entered. I knew immediately that something had happened. On the screen at the front of the room was a document. My name was on it. Soren's name was on it. And the title made my stomach drop. A private agreement between the CEO and a company employee. The room became painfully quiet. This explains a lot, one board member said. I stared at the screen, confused. The document claimed that my involvement in the project was not based on my work. It suggested that I had gained access because of my personal connection with Soren. It made every achievement I had fought for look like a favor, like I had never earned anything. I looked around the room and saw the same doubt I had spent my entire life trying to escape. The feeling of being judged before anyone knew me. This is not true, I said. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. Another document appeared, then a series of messages. Conversations taken out of context. Moments twisted into something they were never meant to be. Someone had carefully built a story where I looked ambitious and dishonest, where Soren looked like someone who had used his position to reward me. And the worst part was not that people believed it. The worst part was that for one terrible second, I wondered if I had been wrong to believe him. I looked at Soren. He stood at the other end of the table, silent. That silence hurt more than the accusations. I knew he was thinking. I knew he was analyzing every possibility. But in that moment, all I felt was the same fear I had felt in the parking garage weeks ago. The fear that when things became difficult, I would be left standing alone. Soren, I said quietly. He looked at me. For a second, I thought he would speak. I thought he would tell them the truth. But he remained silent. The board members took his silence as uncertainty. I took it as something worse. Doubt. The meeting continued, but I barely heard the words around me. Every accusation sounded like a reminder that I was still the outsider, the person who did not belong in their world. After everything I had accomplished, after everything we had rebuilt, I was still the person people could point at and say, he only got here because of him. When the meeting ended, I left before anyone could stop me. I did not wait for explanations. I did not wait for Soren to find the right words. Because the person I needed to choose me had not chosen me when everyone was watching. Outside the building, the cold air hit my face as I walked away. I hated that I was hurt. I hated that his silence mattered. I hated that after everything, a part of me still wanted him to come after me. My phone buzzed. I looked down, expecting a message from Soren. Instead, it was a notification from the company system. The board had scheduled an emergency vote regarding the campaign leadership. My position was at risk. My reputation was already damaged, and the one person who could change everything had said nothing. Inside the office, Soren remained alone in the conference room. The same executives who feared him waited for his decision. The same people who wanted control expected him to choose the company over one employee. But Soren was no longer thinking like a CEO protecting a business. He was thinking about the moment he saw Emmett walk away. The moment he realized that staying silent had hurt the one person who never cared about his power. And this time, the decision in front of him was not about a project. It was about whether he was willing to risk everything to prove that Emmett was never just an employee. For the first time since joining Whitaker Holdings, I entered the boardroom feeling like I had nothing left to prove. Not because I was certain everything would go my way. Not because I believed everyone suddenly respected me. But because I finally understood something important. My value had never depended on whether powerful people accepted me. I had earned my place before anyone defended me. I had earned it through my work, my choices, and the person I refused to stop being. Still, when the emergency board meeting began, my heart was heavy. The accusations were still there. The documents were still on the screen. The damage had already been done. Everyone expected Soren Whitaker to make a decision. They expected him to protect the company, protect his reputation, and distance himself from the person they believed had become a problem. The board chair looked at Soren. "We need your statement before we vote." The room became silent. Soren stood slowly. For a moment, he looked exactly like the man everyone knew. Calm, controlled, impossible to read. Then he walked toward the screen. "Before we discuss Mr. Rowan's position, we need to discuss the evidence." The board members exchanged confused looks. Soren pressed a button, and a new set of documents appeared. Records, communication logs, approval timelines, everything connected to the campaign. The first accusation claims Emmett Rowan received special treatment after becoming personally connected to me, Soren said. That statement is false. He displayed the timeline. Every major decision in the project had been approved before any personal connection existed between them. Every result came from Emmett's strategy, not from Soren's influence. The room grew quieter. Then Soren revealed the source of the manipulated documents. The person who had presented the accusations had selectively removed information, changed dates, and combined unrelated conversations to create a false story. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a calculated attempt to damage Emmett's reputation and weaken Soren's authority. The board members looked toward the executive responsible. The confidence they once had disappeared. Soren did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The truth was enough. You questioned his ability because it was easier than admitting he succeeded, Soren said. You tried to turn his achievement into a rumor because you could not compete with his results. The executive had no answer. The evidence had already spoken. But then Soren did something nobody expected. He turned toward me. There is something else everyone here needs to understand. My breath stopped. Because I knew what he was about to say mattered. When Emmett first met me, he did not know who I was. The room listened. He did not know my position. He did not know my name carried influence. He only knew he had made a mistake, and he chose to take responsibility. Soren paused. That was the first reason I respected him. His voice softened slightly. But it was not the reason I chose to stand beside him today. Nobody moved. I chose him because he is talented. Because he is honest. Because he reminds me that success means nothing if you lose the ability to see people clearly. Those words hit harder than I expected. Not because Soren was defending me. Because he was finally choosing me openly. In front of everyone. Without hiding behind business reasons. Without protecting himself first. The vote that followed was almost immediate. The accusations were dismissed. The project remained under my leadership. The executive who created the false narrative lost the trust of the board and was removed from future decision-making. The people who once questioned whether I belonged now looked at me differently. But the person I looked at was Soren. After the meeting, we stood alone in the hallway. For a moment, neither of us spoke. You knew this could damage your position, I said. Soren nodded. I knew. Then why did you do it? He looked at me. Because losing my position would hurt less than losing your trust again. I felt my chest tighten. The man who controlled entire companies had risked his reputation for one person. But this time, I did not see myself as someone being saved. I saw myself as someone being chosen. I was angry, I admitted. I know. And I still need time. Soren nodded. I know that too. That was what made the difference. He was not demanding forgiveness. He was earning it. As we walked back through the office, something had changed. People no longer looked at me like I was someone who had been given an opportunity. They looked at me like someone who had created one. But even after everything was repaired, one question remained between Soren and me. We had proven the world wrong. Now we had to decide whether we were ready to stop letting the world decide what we were to each other. For the first time since I met Soren Whitaker, I was no longer afraid of losing everything. Not because my life had become perfect, not because every doubt disappeared overnight, but because I finally understood something I had forgotten for most of my life. I was never valuable because someone powerful decided to choose me. I was valuable because I had always been someone worth choosing. A few months earlier, I had been standing beside a damaged luxury car, convinced that one mistake could destroy my future. I was afraid of losing my job, my apartment, and the small amount of stability I had worked so hard to build. I thought my biggest problem was money. I was wrong. My biggest fear was believing I was not enough. Now, standing in the same company where I once felt invisible, everything looked different. People greeted me by name. My ideas were respected. My work spoke for itself. But there was still one thing left unfinished. Soren and I had rebuilt trust, but we had never truly talked about what came next. Winning the board's approval had fixed the damage to my reputation. It had not answered the question between us. One evening, I found Soren in the parking garage where everything had started. The same place where I once stood frozen, waiting for my life to fall apart. He was standing beside his car, looking at the small repaired mark that had been there months before. I smiled slightly. You kept it. Soren looked at the car. I thought about replacing it. I raised an eyebrow. Then why did you not? He looked at me. Because that was the night I met someone who told me the truth when he had every reason to hide. The words brought me back to that first night. The fear. The apology. The moment I thought I was standing in front of someone who could ruin me. I was so scared, I admitted. I know, Soren said. But you still stayed. I looked down for a moment. You know what is strange? Back then, I thought you were the person with all the power. Soren smiled softly. And now? I looked at him. Now I think we both were afraid of losing something. For once, Soren did not look like a CEO carrying the weight of an entire company. He looked like the man I had slowly gotten to know. The man who remembered small details. The man who listened when nobody else did. The man who had learned that protecting someone did not mean controlling their choices. I need you to know something, Soren said. I do not want you here because of what happened between us. I do not want you beside me because I helped you once. He paused. I want you beside me because every time I see you, you remind me that honesty still exists. I stayed quiet. Not because I did not know what I felt. Because for the first time, I was making a choice without fear. When we met, I thought you were someone who could take everything from me. I said. My job. My future. My confidence. I smiled slightly. But you ended up being the person who helped me find those things again. Soren looked away briefly, like he was trying to hide how much those words affected him. Then he did something simple. Something that would have seemed impossible months earlier. He reached out his hand and waited. He did not assume. He did not decide for me. He gave me the choice. And that was the difference. I took his hand. Not because he was a CEO. Not because he had changed my life with one decision. But because I knew the person standing in front of me. The real person. The one behind the reputation and the title. The next morning, I walked into Whitaker Holdings with the same confidence I had fought so hard to build. My desk was still there. My work was still mine. My future was still my own. The only difference was that I no longer felt like I was standing outside someone else's world. I belonged. Later that day, Soren placed a document on my desk. I opened it and laughed when I saw what it was. A simple agreement. A reminder of where everything began. But this time, it was not about obligation or proving anything. It was a partnership built on choice. I looked at Soren and shook my head. You really like contracts. He smiled. Only when they mean something. I looked around the office that once felt impossible to enter. The place where I had been afraid I did not belong. The place where I learned that being seen was not about standing next to someone powerful. It was about knowing your own worth. And as I walked beside the man who once seemed unreachable, I realized the biggest change was not that someone important finally chose me. It was that I had finally learned I was worth choosing all along.